Okay, good morning and welcome to C.A.B.B Notes for December 2018. And this morning we're going to speak about a very fascinating topic of Camusi, K-A-M-U-S-I. And this is a program which we'll explain throughout this show that enables people to communicate across all language barriers. Well, the one thing that always reminds me of is visiting down on the Cape, at the Marconi station.
Oh, yeah.
And this big celebration about the cable going under the ocean. And now we're going to be able to communicate from us across the ocean instantaneously, practically. And then this whole idea that, well, once everybody knows everything about whatever else is doing, there can definitely never be any more war because nobody could hide any secrets or know any kind of secret plans. So it's really fascinating to think that now we have, because of technology, you say, the ability to actually have every person in the world communicate clearly with every other person in the world once the system is up and running.
Right.
So, so how did you ever run into this, Claude?
Well, Nathan, thanks for asking me. I was reluctant to come on, but what we're talking about is Camusi, which is a digital dictionary, every language in the world from one to the other, and it's an impossible task.
Right.
But with computers and the digital programming, it's achievable, at least for most languages. Actually, it's achievable for all languages. It's just a question of time and effort. So, anyways, but to tell you, just to back up and tell you how I found out about it.
Okay.
I was on vacation. My daughter had mentioned an article in one of those tabloids, and she wanted me to get a clip of it, a copy, and it was about Camusi. And so when I came home, it's camusi.org, KAMSUSI.org. And I said, well, that's amazing. It's phenomenal that you can communicate with anybody in any language, or anybody could read information in any language, and their own. And so they're using it all over. I think they're up to 126 languages that are actually active now. Okay, so that's that's how I found out about it.
Yes, and you intimated at one point that the enthusiasm that you can spread to other people is kind of limited.
Well, what I did is I said, well, what would it take, just from one person to another, just to say, have you heard about Camusi? You go online, you just camusi.org, and you just go through their website and some of their exercises or displays. There's some videos. We have one here today we could play later. And I said, how many people would be as enthusiastic about it as I am? Right?
Right.
And it's growing.
Yeah. So you were sort of in communications when you were in the service, right, in Germany?
Well, my military experience was in Europe. We were replacement troops for the ones that were called up for the Berlin Wall in the 60s. And I have a picture of myself on the troop ship coming home. And I said, I had the opportunity to travel all through Europe. And it was 20 years after the war, World War II. And I kept thinking, how could that have been avoided? I mean, because it's such a great area. I had a wonderful time at all the places, different foods and everything. And everything was a holiday. And I think this is the same place where these people were killing each other.
Yeah.
And so I said, what would it take? I don't know, But I said, what impact? So if someone would tell you something that could have an impact on breaking barriers of communication, I saw this, and I said, well, what are you going to do?
Yeah. Well, I makes me recall that I've heard people say that the whole Japanese and United States conflict could have been avoided or greatly ameliorated if they hadn't misunderstood each other.
Uh-huh.
You know, that
Right.
you
And
know,
so if they had Camusi,
yeah, they
they
were.
had an instantaneous translation.
Yeah, yeah. To
Yeah.
get so
Well, in addition to translations, they're doing emojis
oh yeah.
and also sign language.
Oh really?
So that's a new feature. I think it's just come out.
Uh-huh.
But restoration of lost languages,
Right.
either the people that are still speaking it now
Mhm.
or know it. And there's sites that you can go and you can input information and volunteer.
Wow. So all these very remote languages, like they might speak among the Eskimos up in northern Canada,
Right.
or you know,
Because
small.
Noam Chomsky is always telling us that there's a universal grammar that that originated in Africa, and it's imprinted on our brains. They used to think there was an organ for it, like an eye to see
Oh.
and an ear to hear.
Uh-huh.
That there was a universal grammar organ somewhere in the body, but I guess now it's just a configuration in our brain or subconscious or whatever. But everybody's imprinted with it because children learn to speak a language with no instruction.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they just said, how do they, how do they distinguish from all the noise in a room that these are sound? There's somebody speaking to them.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Think about it.
It sort of makes me think of the racial unconscious that Jung was talking about, some kind of awareness that everybody has that we can't really,
Right.
objectify clearly. Yeah. So you said you have could we play the TED Talk on that?
Well,
Is that appropriate at this point?
Well, I tell you, well, I will in a minute.
Yeah.
What I did is I tried an exercise, is that if I just went around and like I came to you and said, introduce you to Camusi.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I have no financial interest in it.
Right.
I can't do it. I mean, I couldn't design it myself. I have nothing to do with it, except it just struck me as being something worthwhile doing.
Oh yeah.
That I just present it to someone and see how they react. So I had a little piece of paper that said camusi.org, and I was giving it to people I knew and asked them to try it out. So I have been getting a lot of phone calls. So I don't know if this will have any impact at all.
Mm-hmm.
But there is a video. It's a short one.
Mm-hmm.
You want me to get it? And,
Sure.
Sure.
Yeah. Show it to us, and that'll help to clarify this. Yeah. I think sometimes we forget about how important communication is, and just take it for granted without questioning whether we really understand what's going on or not.
Security, which is probably everybody in this room, like to imagine that we deserve all of the good things that come our way. But let's stop for a minute and think about some of the advantages that might have paved our paths towards getting here. In my own case, I'm not talking about money. I don't come from a wealthy family, and I wouldn't have been able to get my university degrees without a full package of scholarships and loans and side jobs. But growing up in a country with the ability and desire to see its children through higher education is one of those advantages that I'm talking about.
Yeah.
For half of us, being male has given us a big head start. Our teachers assume that we'll be quicker in math and science. We're much less likely to have to face sexual harassment. And on average, we earn about 20% more than our female counterparts. Where I grew up in America, being white was a huge advantage over my black and Hispanic neighbors. I was never subjected to police stop and frisks. Nobody ever thought I was going to their store to shoplift. My family was never redlined for getting housing in neighborhoods with good schools like Donald Trump used to do as a landlord in New York. And for the 90-some-odd% of us who are straight, we never have to hide our identities with people we love, and we're not subjected to job discrimination or even jail in some countries. These inequities are real, and if we think about race or sex or sexual orientation, we can readily see how They might affect the ways that we're treated in school, the doors that are open to us or slammed in our faces, the internships, the jobs, the references, the bank loans that we either get or are denied. But these are also things that we talk about, that we have names for, and that people are working to try to rectify. So do you think that the Bushes up there are able to lead countries because they're their country because they have better DNA, more capable genes than the Tanzanians on the right, or is it because they were born with a silver spoon in their mouth, with every advantage from prenatal care right on up? And we stand on the shoulders of our parents, who also probably had a lot of these advantages, and are able to pass on to us all these numerous subtle extras, like extracurricular programs, or dental checkups, cultural excursions, museums, shows, or events like this. Travel, sufficient and healthy diet, professional connections. When I was about 12, I got this great gift. It was a gift certificate to my local bookstore. And I spent hours just trying to pick out the books that would add up to the money total on the gift card. This was a gift from my grandparents, who were educators and who saw it as their duty to posterity that I should love learning. Decades later, my sister builds on this heritage of ours and sends my 7-year-old books with positive messages that are going to overcome the sexism that she's going to encounter in her life here in Switzerland. And these are more examples of advantages that we're born into. But they're also examples of an advantage that we don't even have a word to describe. My family can send me to the bookstore or the library. My sister can send books to her niece because books are plentiful in our native tongue. Because of the language I heard even starting in the womb, I had open to me a world of volcanoes and dragons and medieval conquests and science experiments. My daughter has pilots and painters and architects and explorers. And now with the internet, it's not just books. We can ask Google about anything we need to know about. The nutritional value of mushrooms, the original cantons of Switzerland, how to calculate the age of that big tree outside without cutting it down. A good portion of the world's knowledge is available to us because of the language that we, as luck would have it, happen to speak, English. French speakers are similarly advantaged, and German speakers, and Russians, and Japanese, Italians, Portuguese, maybe. The correlation doesn't prove causation, and many additional factors are at work. Income, life expectancy, and access to knowledge in one's native language really do march very, very closely together. Let me add a couple of more advantages that we all enjoy, and which we have names for: healthcare and electricity. Without electricity, you can't run a computer or a smartphone. You do your homework by the light of an oil lamp, and this is something I've seen in many houses that I've been in Africa. You can't keep your food or your medicines or your vaccines fresh and safe. Without healthcare, and it's obvious, right? It's so obvious that in most places it's illegal to deny somebody healthcare on the basis of sex or race or even sexual orientation. Yet healthcare is denied all the time on the basis of language. An immigrant who can't speak to a doctor can't get proper care. People with HIV can't follow the instructions on their drug cocktails if they can't understand the languages that the instructions are written in. And children can't become doctors and nurses and serve their own people if they can't understand the language in which health science is taught to them. But since linguistic exclusion is an unnamed disadvantage, it marches in silence. Listen to this statement from the Ford Foundation, and you can read it, which highlights the advantages that we gain from an omnipresent open internet in a language that we can understand. The internet is not a luxury. Broadband is an essential public utility and must be equally accessible to everyone, because it enables people to express themselves, organize, make a living, participate in policymaking, get a job, earn an education, and do all of the critical things that we so often take for granted. But piping in the internet in the wrong language is like laying water pipes with no clean water source to draw from. Language is a thick glass wall to an open internet, to political participation, to getting a job, to earning an education. We recognize that the internet is an essential utility, like water, like electricity, but we still don't recognize that it's useless to the billions of people who can't read and interact in the lucky languages. The typical response in Europe, in the US, and even in elite circles in Africa, in India, and South America, is let them learn English, let them learn French, let them learn Spanish. We did it, it worked for us. Anyone can learn a second language, and who but the unsuccessful people, the little people, can speak those local languages? Well, yes, you do speak a privileged language and you're successful, but that's either an accident of birth or a lot of study that your circumstances made possible. 95% of Africans are not literate in the languages that their governments inherited from their European colonizers. And that's going to be a quarter of the world's population by 2030. Everybody that I speak to in India tells me that everyone in India speaks English, and they're right. Everyone does. But their cook doesn't, and their housekeeper doesn't, and their driver doesn't. And their children don't, and their grandchildren won't. 95% of Indians don't. And billions of people whose mother tongues are on the wrong side of military or economic power are perpetually excluded from paths towards knowledge and prosperity because people in governments and funding agencies think the languages that they speak are worthless, if not actual impediments to progress. Now, despite the indifference or hostility from many decision makers, we do have solutions that we're proposing to eradicate language as a barrier in reaching internationally declared goals for social development. 496 years ago, Martin Luther figured out that local language was elemental to participation, and he translated the Bible into German. Since then, on the backs of a new technology from that time called the printing press, missionaries have spread their ideas using local languages in hundreds of languages. But we can't pretend that moving from ink to electrons, from the printing press to the tablet, is going to magically make billions of people conversant in one of the languages that the already privileged people happen to speak. Rather, what we're saying is we can work with much smaller populations from these language communities and collect the information that we need to produce linguistic equity for their languages. And then we can plug that information directly into the technologies that have already been developed for English, for French, for German. And the universal translation that this system enables can open universal knowledge to everyone, including the cook and the housekeeper and the driver and their children who dream of becoming doctors and nurses. Now, I'll close with a 2-minute version of what could be a 2-hour dive into some very complicated problems. First, the question that many of you are dying to ask, doesn't Google already do that? And the short answer is no, they don't, and they can't. The basic issue is data. For most languages, digitized data doesn't exist at all, or in any meaningful sense. And where digitized data does exist, it doesn't line up in any way that can be used across languages. Briefly, and I'll leave out a lot of the complexity, it explains how Google has actually gotten pretty good at translating between certain languages in certain situations. Here's why they'll always fail in 99% of translation scenarios, and how DeLucia has re-engineered linguistic data so that we can navigate towards language equity. Now, there are only 2 million pixels on a high-res screen, and I needed 25 million pixels to show this to you. So I put together this fabric that makes the point. This is the universe of human languages. And up here, are the roughly 100 languages that are being worked on in relation to English. And here are all the other languages that are being worked on in relation to each other without respect to English, things like Chinese to Japanese. So this is the void in knowledge that we're trying to fill. So what are we doing to try to do this? Well, most dictionaries start with a word like light. Light is a lot of things. It's not dark, it's not heavy, it's not serious, it's not fattening. And in a monolingual dictionary, you can indicate that by differentiating things with ones and twos and A's and B's and C's. But if you start adding in other languages, French and Swahili and Finnish and Thai, and trying to connect them all on the basis of their English spelling in the middle, you quickly find yourself in a hopeless tangle. He is supposed to be one over. So this tangle is something I call linguistic linguini. What are we doing differently? We start with something, the concept. We treat millions of concepts. Not dark, not heavy, not serious, not fattening. And we connect them vertically for features that they do share, like spelling or pluralization or pronunciation. But then we match the concepts to equivalent words for that idea in French, Swahili, and any other language. And in principle, we can extend to a matrix that connects all 7,000 new languages and never get confused by the arbitrary coincidence of their spelling in English. Beyond words, we can also stitch together elements like verb conjugations and dialect variations, which is a useful concept here. And we can work towards a repository that combines extensive linguistic data in complex ways within and between languages on an equal basis. So where Google says this Arabic word is light and that Arabic word is light, and we're going to guess which one you want based on which one statistically appears the most often in our corpus, Camusi is saying this Arabic word is a device for igniting fires, which is mechero in Spanish and shutitin in Finnish and kibiriti in Swahili. And that Arabic word is electromagnetic radiation that can produce a visual sensation, which is luz in Spanish and balo in Finnish and mwanga in Swahili. And we can make much smarter translation and processing decisions based on that knowledge. Building on these certainties, we can fill a plethora of technological and social voids that stem from linguistic inequity. And I've detailed these on our webpage, and they're being worked on, some of them by students at Camusi Labs. So for example, we can produce definitions in languages like Akan and Sinhala for the equivalence of electromagnetic and radiation and visual and sensation, so that students in Ghana and Sri Lanka and anywhere else can understand the idea of light as energy and pass their physics exams. Eventually, we'll be able to untangle the linguini to automate pretty good translations between any languages for which we have the data, and connect languages at a molecular level that erases languages as a barrier, and working towards a full matrix of human expression across time and space. By recognizing our linguistic privilege, we can act on it. Billions of people who are slated for perpetual exclusion from global engines of knowledge and prosperity, by accidents of, billions of people are excluded by accident of being born into the wrong language. This is a wrong that we can right. We can luxuriate in the privilege of our linguistic luck, or we can recognize the inequities, assemble the knowledge, and build the tools that we need to make every language the right language. Right now, we've got 1,806 language pairs in Camusi for 43 languages, and I invite you to use those dictionaries, and I have a little card that you can put them right on your smartphones. And soon we'll be rolling out tools for people to be able to help build more and more resources for their languages. So I thank you for your attention.
Up here on the stage again.
Go on the screen. As soon as you get seated, you can start talking.
Okay. Yes, so that's the most impressive concept that was presented at the TED Talk. And I think by looking at that talk, I at least get the idea of one thing, the inadequacy of translating someone else's language to English, and try to get English to a third language, and the miscommunications there must be just tremendous.
Yeah. Because there's so many different concepts. You know, like he was talking light,
Yeah.
and then, for example, you can have different dialects.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So this is the screen you get on your phone to do a search. But the other interesting thing that grabbed my attention was he talks about the molecular structure of the language. He takes the language to the molecular level.
Uh-huh.
So it's as if you're taking a word and going down to beyond each letter,
Mm-hmm.
and the way they're linked to every other word, because they're associated with concepts. I think he has over a million concepts in there, I think he said.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure the subtleties of implication are something we've all get frustrated by almost every day. Not being, or I guess the other way around, we probably ignore that fact that we know we're not really communicating clearly with other people, and we don't try to get down to the real essential interaction that we're looking for.
So I think what they have here is, what they have now is 126 languages that
Uh-huh.
they have at different stages of completion. Some are active languages, some are just in various stages of being entered. But and the idea we're talking about the void in language.
Mm-hmm.
That illustration he had with the blanket,
Right.
I thought that was impressive. Where
Yeah.
all the languages connected with English, all the languages connected with each other, and then the whole blanket. I thought that was powerful myself.
Yeah, that was still needed to be taken care of. So on these are all different kinds of.
So what this screen is I've actually gone. This is a live hookup to their website, and so if you C.A.B.B.org, this is where you'd get to. Then you could do your own research, and then of course you could contact them. But you can also participate if you with your own language, and you could become a contributor.
Uh-huh.
So you could if there was another language you spoke and were conversing in, you can go through and enter your words and definitions, and then they would make the linkage.
Oh.
And so what they've done, let's see. You have a special language over here. You see here
Oh, that's.
where they're the ones that are probably not big enough, but they're the different stages of completion.
Uh-huh.
So
You really do wonder, with all these different languages that all the different people in the world are speaking, how do we even get along as well as we do?
yeah. Okay. these are all drop-down windows.
Uh-huh. So, roughly how long has this been pursued?
I think he started when he was in college,
Uh-huh.
and it's been developing it, but now it's actually active and working.
Yeah.
It's a question of building it. When I first got introduced, he was talking about just getting 20 languages on. Now we have 126, so it's a long way to go to 7,000.
Yeah.
So it's strictly, I mean, as a practical matter, it probably is impossible certainly but it's a goal worth doing
Mm-hmm.
for the language. We lost that.
Mm-hmm.
For the languages that exist and the impact they have on people's lives.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I can see where it would be important for a lot of what we in our superior position as speakers of English would be to try to say, okay, we've got to preserve some of these languages that are disappearing.
Right, especially for marginalized people.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's it's something most of us haven't thought about, I guess, that the disadvantage that so many people have because they don't speak the advantaged languages.
Right.
Like,
Yeah, I think he makes that clear.
Mm-hmm.
Although the video wasn't the best quality, I think if you're able to hear it clearly, that's an interesting point he makes.
Mm-hmm.
And what and it's worth the effort. Certainly, the people that are using it appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
So, I made a small contribution. I got a thank you letter from Africa.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, that's where the.
Well, it's all over the world.
Central,
Well, that's one of the countries he's focusing on. But he's got contributors from all over, actually, literally all over the world.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
So if there's anyone that speaks a foreign language and wants, or any language, well, they're all foreign, I guess. You go to CABBB and you can make a contribution. There's some games that you could participate in for vocabulary.
Uh-huh.
So it's just academically, it could be entertaining. But I think we had some Indian-speaking friends. I think they've moved out of the area.
Oh, over.
Yeah. In any event, so that's been my focus on it.
Uh-huh. It was interesting to hear him say that, a couple of generations ago, everybody in India spoke English,
Right.
and now, there's a lot of, hundreds of other languages that are coming back, basically, because English was forced upon them by the British when they took over India.
Uh-huh.
So now all these indigenous languages are returning.
Right.
No.
We're always there.
Yeah, right.
Right.
That have just been covered up by the.
And the idea that you learn it in your mother tongue. So
Yeah.
that'd be an interesting thing to follow up on academically.
Right. Yeah. So it's all.
Because it came up a couple years ago in the campaign when people were talking about Black English.
Oh.
I don't know if you recall that or not.
Uh-huh.
And this is interesting. Because it said, well, you have to face the reality you're here, and just get used to it. Well, here's an opportunity to do something different.
Mm-hmm.
If they wanted to.
Yeah. So you could almost.
It's the mechanism for doing it, potentially.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So. You haven't bumped into anybody.
Well, I think I mentioned to you before. I had a little piece of paper with CABBB, and I was handing them out to people, saying, "Just go here and try it out." And nobody's beating down my door to get back to me.
Right.
So, but I thought, I got you to at least watch the video,
Right.
and whatever impact the show may have, we'll see what happens.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, what I was thinking, Nathan, with the capabilities we have here, is that maybe we could do a show with someone that's more familiar with other languages, and
Yeah.
connect a web link to Martin,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe do a show out of that,
Yeah.
or maybe an exercise.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah,
it's
I
just
wa-
a suggestion.
So,
You don't have to do it over the holidays.
right. So, essentially, we're trying to solve a problem here, right?
Yeah,
Of mis or discommunication
right,
among vast numbers of people over the world.
right.
And I'm thinking, just off the top of my head, that perhaps,
I mean, you wouldn't be as alienated.
mm-hmm. Yeah,
I mean, if you had access to information, and whatever you had to felt you had to say was available to others.
mm-hmm. Yeah.
Obviously, I don't have much to say.
So I'm trying to get at the point that we're trying to solve a problem here. No, there is a problem. No, and people, I think, have to
Right,
begin
as you
to
mentioned, the
un-
void
Yeah.
in language, and the capability we have that wasn't available. I mean, conceptually, you say, well, you link all. I mean, talk about Babylon. I mean,
Yeah, right.
all the languages in the world.
Mm-hmm.
That's where you get Babel from, right?
Right.
Now you have a way of making it meaningful. It's
Mhm.
almost like, think about that.
Right.
Thinking in
Right.
those terms.
Yeah, I think that's good. That's
And
what,
that's what digitizing it gives you the capability.
Mhm.
Otherwise, it's a impossible task. Now it's just a question of to make the effort.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it wouldn't be worth the effort before
Mm-hmm.
the computer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what I'm thinking is that in order to get more people pulled into this system,
Right.
we have to emphasize the problems we're having without it.
Well, that's one. That's I think he tried to do that with the divisions in language.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah, and as I mentioned earlier in the show, there was quite a bit of discussion that the whole conflict between Japan and the Second World War wouldn't have had to escalate to where it did
Yeah.
if people would have understand fully what the other side was saying.
Yeah.
And of course, not to be too biased or anything, but I'm sure the military,
Well, that's another issue.
justifies
That is
this sort of thing all the time by saying,
that's
"Oh, we thought they said that's and so we blew them up."
Yeah.
You know, and
Well, just on commercial level,
mhm,
small traders
yeah,
could communicate directly with their counterparts anywhere in the world.
right.
Think about that.
Small traders, such as people who are dealing any kind of commodity.
Any local manufacturer
Mm-hmm.
would have the capability to communicate back and forth.
Right. Yeah. So they're.
I mean, especially niche markets.
Mm-hmm. So there really be no excuse for anybody making a mistake that comes from
Well,
not having a knowledge that somebody else has, because they could always get that knowledge by communicating with somebody who's been through the experience before, or
Right.
who's tried that particular process before. So I think that's the thing we have to we have to somehow emphasize the fact that we're dumber than we think we are.
that's,
Oh,
yeah.
what-
I don't want to characterize it that way.
Well, I'm sure with just a small amount of reflection, we could all realize at many different points that we've gone down the wrong path, or we've done, practiced the wrong activities or whatever, simply because we're unaware
Right.
that that particular path or activity was going to be detrimental. And now, any kind of activity you want to do, like if you want to fix a washer in your bathroom faucet, you go to the internet,
Right.
and there it is,
Yeah.
in language that we can understand.
And it works.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. So there's so many different challenges we face, especially the idea of raising children, right?
Right.
You know, and people could probably communicate with even other cultures, you know, whether they're in South America or Africa or Australia or wherever, and with this kind of, you know, language interaction,
Right.
you know, they could say, well, you know, do you have this kind of response from your children when thus and so happens? And you know, what seems to help? And you know, you just check around all kinds of cultures and language sources, and you get answers for all kinds of stuff you never even thought you could get answers for before.
Right.
So it's a matter of encouraging more people to have this big question mark.
Right. For projects that have a limited audience, but they're in remote locations, they'd have access to each other.
Right. Yeah, like it might be interesting to get some more conversation between myself and the
Your
indigenous
counterpart someplace else.
or indigenous people on Amazon who are trying to save the rainforest.
Right.
You know,
That's something you're interested in,
right.
and how you could help. And there's somebody that's at the other end with a suggestion.
Yes, so often now, you know, we say, oh, we just brush it off and say, another little problem out in the remote part of the world that I'm not close to.
Well, there's the potential.
But by being able to essentially have a almost heart-to-heart conversation with these people who are being impacted by this kind of you know, environmental destruction, you could really, you know, feel like there's more understanding, empathy, awareness. You know, it's certainly something that I think is really going to be necessary in big amounts to solve our environmental problems. You know, we don't really understand the impact of, well, like the pipeline that's going through North Dakota. You know, how did the Native Americans who live out there react to this? You know, we get a few vague ideas about how they might, you know, say some prayers or do some kind of drumming or something, but to get a real concept of where they're at and how they relate to their ancestors, you know, the burying grounds and all the other things. I think you know, a lot of that we just can gloss over because it's not possible for them to really communicate from their language to ours about what this really means to them.
Right. Well, when I was in high school, the focus was on Vatican II.
Oh yeah.
The idea of reconciling all of Christianity, all of Christendom. You know, how are we doing on that?
Uh-huh.
Is it a language issue?
Right. Yeah, we just think of all the churches here in Bennington. You know, as I guess numerous people have said that the 11 o'clock Sunday morning is the most segregated hour of the week because you know, all of these faith communities are sort of locked into what each community feels is in a certain way an alien type of experience for
Talking
them.
past each other.
Yeah, and there's just so much really heartfelt belief or questioning even that's not able to be shared because people know, just like this community thing, are not don't appreciate the importance of communication with as many other souls in the world as possible. I got an interesting email from an old friend of ours concerning the environmental situation, and his statement that he picked up somewhere, I suppose, was in the environmental responsibilities, every one of the 7.5 billion people in the world has an accelerator and a brake. No, each person, equally has the opportunity to either make the problem worse or make it better. and just the idea that the ideas and thoughts of somebody off in some remote African community would have equal influence over the environment that I have. No, that's hard for me to comprehend. But if I could communicate with them in their language and they with me, that might make all the difference in the world.
Well,
So I think that's it's all a matter of sensitizing. I think becoming more sensitive, more aware. Like environmentalists try to make us aware that the other plants are talking to us. That there are vast influences out there in the world that we're not accessing, we're not listening to, we're not able to interact with creatively. So, this whole idea of people being able to communicate, I think, is something that has to be more enriched, really.
Well, you asked me to come on and talk about Camusi. I told you
Right.
all I know, and
Yeah.
I'd encourage anyone to go to camusui.org, KAMSUI, and try it out for yourself. Thank you, Nathan.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Turn it over.
Okay. We'll see everyone next month.